Hello, and welcome to The Outcast by Muncie Outreach. My name is Jordan. My pronouns are they, them.
Hi, my name is Rose, and my pronouns are she, her.
My name is Luke, and my pronouns are he, him.
Today, we have a new co-host on the show, and I will let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Leo, and I use he, him.
Today's episode will be a little different, since Holocaust Remembrance Day was yesterday, April 9th. We thought it would be a good idea to do an episode honoring the victims and survivors of the extremely cruel and brutal acts of genocide. The title of today's episode will be called Antisemitism, a Past Hidden in Plain Sight. So, trigger warning. This episode will include heavy topics like anti-Semitism, discussion of Nazis, Nazi rhetoric, the Holocaust, and white supremacy. Anti-Semitism didn't just begin with Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, nor did it end there. Also, anti-Semitism wasn't just confined to Germany, for the US played a major role in Nazi ideas and policies as well. We will be discussing the origins of anti-Semitism, some Nazi propaganda, American influence on Nazi Germany, how their presence in America influences today's society and culture, and how to recognize anti-Semitic stereotypes, symbols, and codes. Now let's talk a little bit about brief history.
So, brief history. In the Torah, the main Jewish text, Jews have been persecuted since the beginning of time. In Egypt by Pharaoh, the Maccabees and the Romans, Esther and Haman, etc. But we here at the podcast don't rely on religious texts as our only source of factual information. Historically, the Jewish people have faced persecution mainly in medieval times, when the Catholic Church accused Jewish people of having a role in killing Jesus. Maybe it was the Jewish people, maybe it wasn't. There's no accurate way to tell. Growing up in the deep South, I've been told personally you killed Jesus. Leading up to the Holocaust, different groups ran through Poland and Europe, ransacking Jewish villages, shtetls, and communities. These events were called pogroms. They happened from the late 1800s up until the actual Holocaust took place. Jewish communities were wiped out constantly. Some people were even forced to dig their own graves so that their attackers didn't have to drag their bodies. As we know, the Holocaust took at least 6 million lives, and we don't know exactly how many because when the death camps were liberated, Nazis destroyed the records of who came in. However, there are approximately 5 million non-Jewish lives taken as well. Those were the lives of many Roma, LGBTQ, communist, mentally or physically disabled people, or just Nazi-defined people. In these camps, as we know, experiments were done on many people. Some famous ones are Dr. Mengele's twin experiments on people with different colored eyes and pregnant women. Thanks to him killing women in different stages of their pregnancies, we now know what the fetus looks like in each of the 9 months in the mother's womb. If you couldn't work yourself to death, then you would die as soon as you arrived. In Elie Wiesel's book, The Night, he recalls seeing babies thrown into pits of fire upon his arrival. His mother and little sister were killed on his arrival as well, and his father had to lie about their age so that they didn't meet the same fate. His father died of dysentery, which is a stomach condition, a stomach infection, which basically, to put it frankly, makes you shit yourself until you die. This was a common fate to meet in these cramped barracks where Jewish people were forced to live in. So Nazi propaganda. A lot of the Nazi propaganda depicted Jewish people as small, short, fat, hook-nosed, greedy people. You can see a lot of these, as we'll discuss later, imagery. A lot of this imagery is still portrayed in a lot of media today. Holocaust jokes are also a topic that is really controversial for some reason in today's media. Just to be honest with you guys, if you're not Jewish, you shouldn't make Holocaust jokes. I, as a Jewish person, think that if you are a Jewish person using jokes about the Holocaust to process this traumatic event, that you still face side effects, not side effects, that's medicine, that you still face traumatic memories from, if you use humor to cope with it, then I think that's okay. And if a Jewish person is making a joke about the Holocaust, it's okay to laugh. I think that's what we really need to focus on right here. However, if you are not a Jewish person, and if you are making a joke about the Holocaust, you just need to fucking stop. It's not funny coming from you guys, because you have never experienced the persecution that the Jewish people went through and still continue to go through today. Us as a Jewish population in general are honestly just so exhausted from having to explain and not being listened to when we say that these jokes are over the line. Dark humor is really popular in today's media, and I think to some extent it can be good, but also you really need to read the room and know your audience and recognize your own privilege when using it. And also, just be fucking educated.
Mm-hmm. It's also just like with something as serious as that, it's not a joke. The amount of people who lost their lives and who lost their loved ones, who that's not funny, and it never will be. And the fact that people, I'm not going to explain what was said, but there was an instance in high school where I had a friend who was converting to Judaism, and they got purposely targeted with an anti-Semitic joke one time that was about the Holocaust. And it's just not only are you making light of something that was so tragic and awful, it's you're making a joke towards someone who's alive and well right now, as if it would be funny to you for it to happen again. How could you? I hate it. Anyway, sorry for ranting a little bit. I just
No, you're fine. I grew up with those jokes as well too. Sadly, in Montgomery, Alabama. It was, deep South, that kind of vibe place. But I was always targeted for anti-Semitic jokes. People would pass me drawings of Hitler, pass me drawings of swastikas on paper, just making all kinds of really, really mean jokes about me. Even here, I got a joke about somebody's kill count on Call of Duty being 6 million, in German on Call of Duty. Yeah, it's just not good, and it still happens today, and it needs to stop. It needs to be taken seriously.
No.
Here in America, especially, it's really bad.
Yeah.
And, Leo's about to explain why. Take it away, Leo.
Wait, before I was going to get onto that, I just wanted to say that, the idea of the jokes and stuff is kind of perpetuating, and I don't know how all you're going to go, how much you're going to get into this. The idea of the intergenerational trauma that this has caused, I think that in general, Judaism comes with a lot of intergenerational trauma, just kind of because of the nature of how much trauma that the cultural group has experienced from, again, you mentioned going all the way back to the ancient times. So that there's just so that idea of, and then that combined with, well, again, there's the individual instances of hate crimes and pogroms, but kind of how there's intergenerational trauma with race. I definitely think, especially with Judaism, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma that comes from the fact that so recently you have family members or family members of family members who have been through or tangentially involved in something so awful. And I just think that that's something that kind of gets forgotten, is that just because the thing happened and isn't actively happening at the moment does not mean that people are not still hurt and actively hurting from it. And so I think that that's kind of a big issue in general.
If you don't mind me adding, just really quick before you talk about it happening in America, just really quickly. As a Jewish kid growing up, we went to Sunday school, and as young as I can remember being 9 and having to learn about the Holocaust in Sunday school. I had to learn as a Jewish kid that these people killed a lot of us and a lot of our grandparents and a lot of our great-grandparents, and that they still exist today. Because if we did not know this, which is really sad, we could possibly be hurt again because of it if we weren't educated about it. In fact, going off still, a lot of our holidays are based around, well, they tried to kill us and they killed a lot of us, but they didn't kill us all. That's basically Passover and Hanukkah.
Can I ask this really quickly? What I've always heard about Jewish people, they were called the chosen people. Why are you targeted so much?
Well, we're chosen for a lot of things. We're chosen to have pretty good food. I don't actually know the history on that one. I think that's more of Christian thing where, I mean, I know it's used in Judaism throughout the Torah, as you know, we follow the story of the Jewish people, but I know it's also referenced in other religions, and I don't really know a whole lot about that.
Okay. But anyway, let's go into America.
And
America.
I also
not the Promised Neverland.
A lot of really good points are being made, and I do think that in terms of especially we're talking about America, the American desensitization to it in particular is rough for a lot of reasons, honestly. And that kind of brings us to our next point. I'm just kind of gonna go all the way back to even before Nazi Germany, and the fact that a lot of the legal practices and ideas of Nazi Germany weren't started there. And in fact, many of them were directly based on American ideas. And that's like what they said. So to do this, there's a couple things I want to talk about with this. The first one being the idea of the Nuremberg Laws, and then how that was based on an American thing. The eugenics movement in America and then in Germany. And then I'm just going to super quickly go over the American Nazi Party, War Profiteers, Operate and Operation Paperclip, which are three like kind of important terms basically you should know, glossary terms. Then I'm just kind of throughout it, I'm going to summarize like what the modern day connotations of each of these are. And if anyone also feel free to chime in anytime because this is a conversation. So the first part, the Nuremberg Laws are basically, you might have heard of them, were the laws that legally stripped Jewish people of their citizenship and other legal protections during World War II. That period of time, even kind of preceding World War II, it was one of the starting points. Usually the Nuremberg Laws are where we look at things when we're like, kind of before the ghettos, before the camps. That was one of the biggest red flag where everyone should have stepped in and stopped it there, but obviously that didn't always happen. So, but that's the things that said like Jewish people couldn't marry, Jewish people are required to label themselves with the Star of David, etc., etc. So the thing is before those laws came out, several German lawyers and scholars were actually sent to all other countries to study like how to racially codify laws and make laws that would legally cover all those bases. While they looked at a lot of countries, including like South Africa was one of the more infamously segregated places at the time, but America was actually where they got most of, if not all of their frame of reference. Yes.
Sorry, can I say something really quickly?
Go ahead.
One thing that I've heard a lot recently, if you know the phrase America, home of the brave, land of the free, it's more like America, home of the hate, land of the thief.
Yeah, that is pretty true. America in general doesn't have a long history of equality. And that going on to that, it was the Jim Crow laws were the biggest influence of a form of disenfranchising people who weren't technically slaves, but still basically meaning no legal protections. They also studied how the legal codifications for Native Americans and immigrants and other groups and citizenship criteria for those other groups. And so most of the things in general that eventually would become the Nuremberg Laws were based on pre-existing laws in America. And it was like, I believe it had like several pages of the man who wrote the guide, the National Socialist Handbook for Law and Legislation. Most of them revolved around Americans' rules, citizenship requirements for Filipinos, Puerto Ricans, African Americans, and American Native Americans. So it was very much inspired by us. Continuing on from that, people don't always like to talk about it, but I would argue that first I'm going to say, explain what the concept of eugenics is, if you're unaware. The idea of eugenics is that, like, on its base level, it's the idea that different traits are directly related to genes. It started in the 1800s when genes were first being understood and studied, and it has been a long time going forwards. And so with that idea is the idea that different traits that are connected to genes can be passed down through generations. And so to make the best society, you should slowly breed out the bad genes. And I say that in quotation marks because
there are no bad genes.
Well, yeah, there's no bad genes. That's not how this works. But how this was often used, especially back in the day, race was often a thing of bad genes. Usually neurodivergence and disability was the most common genetic trait that was unvalued. However, as we see in the Holocaust later, and later on, different religious and cultural groups, which are distinctly unrelated to genetics, were affiliated with genes, such as blaming Judaism or saying that the Romani people were a result of bad genes. And so therefore, what was done is a combination of two things. There were several ways that were decided to weed out the bad genes, but the two most horrific and also horrifyingly common was forced sterilization and euthanasia. And so we often think of when we think about killing off certain groups, we would probably think of the World War II and the concentration camps and whatnot, but a lot of that originated even significantly before World War II, and back to, especially in America would forcibly sterilize, often without telling people or without consent. Usually people of color were most commonly sterilized, and then Native Americans and Black women were forcibly sterilized, and Black men. And then euthanasia, more related to anyone with a disability. I believe it was in one California institute, also probably used in quotation marks because of the ethics of the situation, but 4,000 people.
4,000?
4,000. And something that they even talked about is that was even where the idea of, if I recall, they even argued for gas chambers to be used in the sense to mass euthanize these people who were deemed unfit. And so
can I quickly ask, if you don't know, that's fine, I just want to know, how do you not tell somebody you're gonna do that? Like, how do you, wouldn't they,
okay,
like, I'm just a little confused on that, if you can tell that.
I also know parts of it too. It goes more into gynecology, actually. I know it happens sometimes when a woman is given a routine pap smear that it could possibly have happened then, or during a routine doctor's visit or something like that. I'm sure Leo knows more about it than I do, but I just wanted to give my input. A lot of not so great stuff happens with gynecologists.
I mean, most people aren't super well educated about like all the procedures they go through at the doctors. So there's a lot of instances where people would have just been able to do it while like hiding it, you know? I mean, most people aren't able to just tell magically that they've been sterilized. Like, it's just unfortunate. And then, I mean, when you consider the fact that the people who were being forcibly sterilized and euthanized were minority groups that were targeted by discrimination, you had people who had more privilege and power than they did doing these things. So without a doubt, they were probably able to get away with it because of the privilege that they had, which is upsetting. But it just goes to show how problematic all of this is. And I think it's also just really upsetting when you realize that the eugenics, the euthanasia, even the possibility of gas chambers, that all intersects eventually with anti-Semitism and with the actions of Nazi Germany. And you can even still see the effects of that now. For example, I have a sister who's autistic, and I've heard the terminology before of people referring to her as having Asperger's and being high functioning. Both of those terms, including low functioning, those are all three terms that were sort of became common when talking about autism, and they came from a Nazi scientist who would classify autistic people as high or low functioning based on whether or not they would be able to work. It's just those terms were literally used to deem whether someone was worth living or not. And you still see that today. And that just goes to show how widespread these issues are and how they're still here and that we still need to talk about them.
Thank you for sharing that. I've always heard that term, those terms, as like kind of like not in a positive, but as in a medical case. So thank you for informing us about that.
No problem. I mean, that's like the whole point. We're trying to be informative. So,
yeah.
Cool. Things are going good.
Yeah. Continue, Leo, if you have more.
Yeah, it was, well, and I was going with that. That's actually one of the reasons why, in general, I believe in the community, they're trying to get rid of the terms and classifications of low versus high functioning. And now it's more seen as a binary of, not a binary, but the salad bar model, which is like the idea that you can have many different traits or spectrum of abilities in different areas that are higher or lower. And so it's not a matter of, yeah, you are this much autistic or not at all. And like, it's just kind of in general that I do think that that's one of the many reasons that the community has pushed against that classification. And it's really, and that's kind of what's the saddest about it, is both in the sense of it's sad in general, but the fact that we're still seeing stuff like that. And we're seeing the idea of a mercy killing, which is often another term tossed around in terms of eugenics, especially, again, more for people with disabilities, where, again, it's murder is what happens. And this is done against their will to promote the idea of eugenics and the idea that better off out of the system. And it's horrific. And then going with the idea of how does it happen without you knowing, like Luke said, often it would happen during gynecological procedures that they were unaware of, not dissimilar to the, Tuskegee syphilis experiments or the like. Yeah, where they just kind of didn't know what was happening. I'm going to wrap up with this one because it is kind of, there's a lot that we could go into about, like, the fact that forced sterilization for African American women was still going on up until 1973, and even after that, like, especially the civil rights movement even led to more of it. It's a whole thing. You should do further research on it. I recommend it if it doesn't make you really sad like it does me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sorry, it's very good that we're talking about this, especially because, I mean, eugenics was one of the biggest threats to the Jewish people, and probably like still is in some cases because white supremacy is still an issue.
So just to kind of speed run the others, because there's not as much to say here. There was the...
Okay. I was just going to say, so eugenics, people were able to pick out Jewish people, supposedly pick out Jewish people by the way they looked, by their genes, so on.
Bullshit.
And this is shown in modern stereotypes. Rose has a little bit more information on those. Why don't we take it away, Rose?
Yeah.
Okay, the McDonald's thing, that got me. Okay, So, well, I mean, we probably talk about it later. When it comes to eugenics, we need to mention like about how the idea of like Jewish people having bad genes that need to be bred out, maybe it just seems like counterproductive to your shitty mission.
Maybe if you let us breed with other people during medieval times, we wouldn't have.
Like, you know what? Yeah, I'm sorry. That annoys me. Like, okay, sorry. I'm gonna move on. Okay, so now Luke and I are going to work together to discuss some common things to look out for in regards to antisemitism. So, like Luke said, we're gonna go into some common stereotypes that you might be able to see or come in contact with. Okay, so one big one is the idea that all Jewish people are wealthy, stingy, and / or greedy. According to a pamphlet by the European Network Against Racism titled Debunking Myths About Jews, this stereotype has origins, like Luke said earlier, that goes back to medieval times. This source says that due to discriminatory laws in regards to land ownership and an inability to work in the craft sector, many Jewish people ended up becoming merchants, tax collectors, and money lenders because they just didn't really have other options. And so as a result, this made them an easy scapegoat for people to target in difficult economic or political times. And as a result, it's made this idea that all Jewish people are greedy and selfish and stingy with their money and wanted to keep it all for themselves. And that's not true, first of all, and just has bled into so many other anti-Semitic things. Not good.
Yeah. So branching off this is the stereotype that Jewish people secretly control the banks, media, and or government. This may also be referred to as Zionist control of the media. This stereotype is straight up bullshit, but has been seen time and time again, especially in conspiracy theories. But that's not a surprise, since the major majority of conspiracy theories are actually anti-Semitic in origin.
Yeah, practically like all conspiracy theories are anti-Semitic, and it's interesting because so many people don't notice, and it's so frustrating. But hopefully, you'll be able to better recognize it.
I was just going to say that I had to yell at someone for you, like, not yell at them, but they were talking about like making lizard people jokes. A lot of people do that. And I was like, bro, okay, I know that it's not about lizards. It's never been about lizards. That's just a dog whistle. Lizards. Oh my God.
So on that note, Leo, another thing to look out for is that typically Jewish people will often be dehumanized by people. Especially in talks about the idea of Jewish people secretly controlling everything. And usually you'll see Jewish people being portrayed as goblins, or more commonly as lizards or lizard people. And this pops up a lot, and it sounds so stupid, but it's so common, and so many people don't get it because they see it literally. But so a big example of this is the conspiracy theory about the Illuminati, which is the idea that there's a secret group made up of shape-shifting lizard people that control the banks and our government. And so it's purposely made to look like crazy nonsense to most people, but it's legitimately rooted in anti-Semitism. The creator of this conspiracy theory, David Icke, was both an anti-Semite and a Holocaust denier. I hate it. But so the use of lizard people is a deliberate anti-Semitic dog whistle. It's a coded message meant to be understood by other anti-Semitic people and groups, and it is supposed to go over the heads of most people, and it works. I mean, it shows by the crazy amount of people who take it in a literal sense and just constantly make jokes about it without understanding its harmful nature and the intentions behind it.
Can I say something? This is all right, I won't say anything. Okay?
I'm joking, go for it.
I know. But this is the true story. I actually grew a lot since middle school. When I was in 7th grade, I used to think that they actually meant humanoid lizards.
And that's the problem, because they
so did I, and I am a Jewish person.
That's one of the reasons too. That's one of the reasons why conspiracy theories are so problematic, because so often they're meant to go over people's heads, and that's how they spread. I hate it.
Well, and I know that Luke, you could probably vouch for if this is any of the thing that you've experienced or heard, but I have some of the Jewish people that I've talked to or heard talk about this is a shockingly common stereotype that Jewish people literally have horns and or tails.
Yep. But we don't get them till we're 21. Yes. That was a joke. You can laugh. It's
Sorry.
No, that was a reference from Jojo Rabbit. And you can see, I didn't really like that movie too much. I feel like it missed quite a few marks. But you can see the main character, drawing pictures of Jewish people with horns or little tails or, yeah. But no, sadly, I think it would look cool if I had horns. But, Jewish people don't get horns or anything. I can't believe I have to say this, but no.
I didn't know that all Jewish people were automatically homestucks. I'm sorry, everyone. But
no, you're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you might have also heard me mention earlier in the podcast that it's common for Jewish people to be stereotyped as having large noses. Jewish people are often stereotyped for that because of certain features that a lot of ethnically Jewish people obtain. Back in medieval times, Jewish people were broadly discriminated against. So it was hard for Jewish people to marry outside of their religion. Because of that, there's a lot of inbreeding causing Jewish people to all develop similar traits, which you can still kind of see today. But it is, really anti-Semitic to say, oh, you've got a big nose, so you must be Jewish. Well, it is somewhat true that you can see these today. It's really, not that obvious. It's just kind of, a little thing.
But continuing on, though it's more of an extremely harmful myth than a stereotype, there's also the topic of blood libel, which is an accusation that Jewish people used the blood of Christians, typically portrayed as children, in religious rituals or in the preparation of Passover bread. It's wrong. It's stupid. I hate it. Anyway, according to a teaching aid on addressing anti-Semitic prejudice by the OSCE, or the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the myth of blood libel has, like a lot of anti-Semitism, been around since ancient times and has been used to falsely accuse Jewish people of killing non-Jewish people for ritual purposes and purported to be in league with the devil.
Yeah, so the Passover ceremony, which actually was about a week and a half ago for us here in America, it switches times around depending on what year it is because the Jewish people follow a different calendar for our holidays. Anyway, that's besides the point. The Passover ceremony of counting the 10 plagues involves placing a drop of red wine on the plate, counting each of the 10 plagues. The Jewish God sent down the Egyptian people to try to have them free their Jewish slaves. The final plague is death of the firstborn. This is a story also in the Old Testament. So if this final plague makes the Jewish people bloodthirsty monsters, then that makes any branch of Christianity that uses the Old Testament bloodthirsty monsters by default.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to also add to that back in olden times, back when the first temple and even the back when the old temple was still standing, there were routine sacrifices of animals, like lambs and other kosher animals. But this happened in all religions too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think they're just looking for excuses at this point.
Oh yeah, 100%. But.
Sorry, when you were talking about sacrifices, I just kept thinking about a story in the Christian Bible where a man almost sacrifices his son because God tells him to do that.
That's also in the Torah.
Well, it's in a lot of these, and it's just why is one better than the other?
I like to say that the Bible is fan fiction of the Torah. But that's just, one of my jokes.
I love that.
Jesus is a Torah OC.
Okay. Well.
Anyway.
Keep talking.
Yeah. But so historically, these false accusations of blood libel have been followed by anti-Semitic riots and mass murders. So not only does this false myth perpetuate the ideas that Jewish people are all bloodthirsty and evil, which is once again just complete and utter bullshit, it's also being used to justify and perpetuate violence as well, and that's been happening for a long, long time. It's not new, and it hasn't gone away either, unfortunately. But so because so many of these anti-Semitic tropes have been around for so long, and because they're oftentimes very like normalized, not everyone has been educated to readily recognize them as anti-Semitic. And there's the unfortunate reality that it's not uncommon for anti-Semitism to fly under people's radars. And like we briefly discussed earlier, this can be really dangerous because it plays into the perpetuation of those ideas, which can and still do put Jewish people in danger. However, another major threat to Jewish people's safety are the white supremacist groups that purposefully will circulate these ideas, along with Nazi ideology and propaganda. These groups like deliberately target Jewish people, put their safety at risk, and being able to better identify them is imperative to be able to fight against anti-Semitism and to help better support and protect Jewish people from them. Emphasis on the support. However, though it's not always the case, these groups will often try to use propaganda, dog whistles, symbols, and codes, trying to keep their alignment with white supremacism and anti-Semitism concealed in order to remain inconspicuous. Fucked up.
So moving on to symbols and codes. White supremacists will often use codes and symbols to try to subtly tell their other white supremacists their ideologies without being as obvious to the general public.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of codes and symbols used to signify these things, and we can't cover all of them. But however, like if you want to look further into it, you can go to adl.org/hate-symbols, which is a collection of hate symbols gathered by the Anti-Defamation League.
One common code to see is 14/88, meant to signify a white supremacist slogan and Heil Hitler. Sometimes you'll see people use the 88 by itself. So if you see somebody with 88 in like their Instagram username, their Discord tag, their TikTok username, stay away. They're a white supremacist.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you don't know, if you have an 88 in your bio and you didn't know this, just take it out. It's really kind of scary for us Jewish people to see, like when we're online.
Okay, I'm good. I have 85.
Okay, you're good.
And then also, if you see the acronym 6MWE, please be extremely careful because this acronym stands for 6 million wasn't enough, referencing the near 6 million Jewish people that were murdered in the Holocaust. This is like especially dangerous, I feel, just because it's not only like saying I'm fine with what happened, but also like calling for further violence. That's just no. If you see this, please stay away and be safe. Okay.
Other common codes and symbols include the Nazi Celtic cross, the term Sieg Heil, meaning Hail Victory, a Nazi party slogan, the SS bolts, a symbol that represents the SS forces of Nazi Germany, and in extreme cases, something like Pepe the Frog, a meme that has been used to spread anti-Semitic ideology.
Another code that it's not as common as the other ones, but I have seen Jewish people like talking about it online, is that you can sometimes see people referring to a they or denoting individual names in a set of 3 parentheses. And this is something that is used in white supremacist circles to dog whistle Jewish people.
Also, in the punk community, it is easy to find someone who openly believes in Nazi ideology. If you aren't punk, stay away from people with red laces on combat boots or Doc Martens. That means they are allied to neo-Nazi political beliefs. Also, if you are in the punk community, please, for the love of God, don't use the crossed out swastika. Jewish people will see the swastika before the red cross out. As a punk, you should be more motivated to protect the Jewish people than gaining clout from beating up a Nazi. Instead, use the cross out 88 instead to identify that to other punks that you are against Nazi rhetoric.
Can I ask on this? Would a crossed out SS be okay too, or should you stay away from that?
Once again, it's another, Nazi symbol that was used during Nazi era time, as opposed to more current white supremacy things that you will see, because there is a difference between neo-Nazis and actual Nazis. So in the punk community, you'll probably be more likely to encounter neo-Nazis. So I would really recommend to avoid using any World War II Nazi era imagery on your vest or battle jacket or on your crust pants or whatever. So I just stay away from any of that at all. Just use the ADA. It's not that difficult, and people will get what you're going for.
Okay.
Inform the people.
I also, if you don't mind me like popping in on that, because it is like that is a big issue with the punk community, is that initially skinheads, which has become synonymous with neo-Nazis, originally didn't start with neo-Nazis. It was just kind of like it was a classism movement that gathered the attention of a lot of angry white people. And disenfranchised angry white people are very easily geared towards the establishment for some reason. Being a Nazi isn't punk, guys. You're just helping the, like, Rage Against the Machine, the one you're upholding. It is hard because a lot of the, like, the hard punk, usually it's hardcore punk or the more of the skin scene. A lot of the imagery, you mentioned like combat boots, Doc Martens combat boots, the shaved head, etc., which was originally more of like a class thing, has been kind of...
Yeah, it was to symbolize the working class, I think.
Yeah, it was more of like working class, no war but class war, anti-Margaret Thatcher, specifically in Britain. And then it got, basically, the Nazis were louder about it, and the neo-Nazis were like, nope, it's an us symbol. And it's like, no, you're not affiliated. Is it from Mr. Incredible? You are not affiliated with me.
Yeah, it is.
So that it is hard, but I do think that I like what you said about how to differentiate yourself, because that's also something that's frustrated me with like parody MAGA hats, which I see a lot on like white liberals mostly, and I'm just like, you don't realize how
scary because you can't read the print from afar, just like you can't see the cross out if you're a Jew.
Exactly. I'm not going to get close enough to you if I think you're a MAGA person to read that it says, make Mordor great again. Ha ha, Lord of the Rings. So funny. Cool.
Yeah, it's just like, no.
It just also, I just in general think that like, hey, don't make jokes about it. It's just not funny. Even if you're
trying making jokes is drawing attention to it.
Yeah.
Just in my...
So,
sorry.
I just think that's just a thing of note. But
yeah, let's move on to propaganda.
Yeah.
Okay. So with the discussion of neo-Nazis and about anti-Semitism in modern culture, you'll also oftentimes see Nazi propaganda and anti-Semitic movements that pop up, or maybe not like strictly anti-Semitic movements, but movements that tie into anti-Semitism. One example that, well, I think it's more, okay, so basically, I'm just going to explain it and then do the little bit or whatever. So people who are listening to this podcast probably have heard of this trend that popped up. But so not that long ago, there was a trend that popped up on TikTok called Super Straight. It was created by a user named Kyle Royce and was later adopted by neo-Nazis on 4chan. So it's unsure about whether it was started by or adopted by neo-Nazis. So basically the idea of it was a transphobic trend. The idea being that it's a sexuality to not want to date trans people. So it's basically trying to put transphobia, like trying to justify it as if it's a sexuality when it's transphobia. But so it was a trend that got adopted by neo-Nazis on 4chan. And though there is debate on whether it was started or adopted by neo-Nazis, I personally feel like it's too coincidental for me, because Super Straight can and has been called SS, which obviously ties into references to the SS forces in Nazi Germany. Also, some people have literally used the SS bolts to symbolize Super Straight. And it's just, it seems too coincidental to me, and it's still super fucking disturbing. But either way, this is a modern trend that neo-Nazis identified with. They identified with its hate and its transphobia, and they purposely decided to use it to spread dissent and cause harm to minority groups. And it's only one example of how white supremacist ideology, that of which often intersects with anti-Semitism, still is just as much of a danger today to people's safety.
QAnon and Save the Children. QAnon, if you haven't heard of it before, it is, according to the BBC, a wide-ranging, unfounded theory that says Donald Trump, who some consider as a godlike figure within this group, is waging a secret war against Satan-worshipping pedophiles in the government, businesses, and in the media. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. It sounds really ridiculous on the surface, but hopefully at this point you could recognize that it has much deeper meanings.
Mm-hmm.
The movement started on 4chan message boards with an anonymous person going by Q.
So, I mean, this is just so blatantly anti-Semitic. It makes me lose my mind. Just the idea of like, oh, a secret elite group controlling the government and the media. This elite group also happening to be Satan worshippers who harm children, with literally some QAnon members say that they're doing blood libel by killing these children and using their blood for rituals. It's just like, wow, I wonder where those ideas may have come from.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of QAnon rhetoric, is white supremacist and anti-Semitic rhetoric in a trench coat. With the way QAnon rhetoric is framed, it is usually put out in a way to seem inconspicuous, as to get more general audiences to be introduced into their rhetoric and to easily convert people into their way of thinking. A prime example of this is the hashtag Save the Children movement.
Okay, I'm gonna explain this a little bit more in depth, but before I do that, I want to say that pedophilia and the sexualization of children is a legitimate issue in our media, and sex trafficking is also a legitimate issue as well. And these issues are ones that a lot of people want to work on dismantling and addressing. But so QAnon used this issue in order to get people from a general audience introduced into the idea that pedophilia is not a general issue within our society, but rather a specific result of this evil group of pedophiles in our government and Hollywood, that of which is used to further bring people into QAnon propaganda and its white supremacist ideology. It's sort of like a rabbit hole, like trying to get people in and then slowly like taking them further down until they can't get out. But so that's honestly like one of the things that personally scares me the most about QAnon, because a lot of people online who have like been talking about it reference family members who have gotten pulled into this, and just it's literally like they can't get out of that ideology because they're so stuck in it now that they've been pulled in. And I think it's even more disturbing considering how this kind of thing just, it reflects so much about like, it's way too similar to how Nazis used anti-Semitic propaganda in Germany around the time of World War II, just drawing people in until everything happened. It's messed up basically, and it's worrisome that stuff like that's still happening, even if it's not as prominent.
And once again, it takes us right back to Nazi Germany, how Nazis framed anti-Semitic ideology / groups as in a way to hide the anti-Semitism and to more easily convert people, similarly to how we see QAnon propaganda function today. Close to how white supremacist ideology and anti-Semitism are an issue within the general American context, both historically, as they discussed earlier, and in the current day, it is also an issue within our government and current politics.
Okay, I will continue on, but like, does anyone want to like add comments or anything?
Yeah, well, you were talking about with like QAnon, the idea of radicalization, and that's actually a huge issue. And like, there's a term called stochastic terrorism, which is the idea of where one person is basically a stochastic terrorist is someone who participates in this pipeline of, while there's no leaders, such as what we traditionally think of as a terrorism hierarchy, we'll see multiple people in a pipeline sort of egging people on until one person commits a lone wolf act of a hate crime or severe violence. So Ben Shapiro, Alex Jones, some of the figures you're going to mention coming up here, Q of QAnon, many of the QAnon leaders, all of them are stochastic terrorists because they are egging people on to more and more extreme and violent acts. Tucker Carlson is a big news pundit, stochastic terrorist. And the problem is because of the nature of it, Rush Limbaugh also, because of the nature of the part of the definition is the fact that unlike regular terrorists or Osama bin Laden as a leader who would be able to be directly traced back, stochastic terrorists have a level of deniability about it. And so that's why we got to really be careful when we see stuff like this. And just what you were saying about the fact that people are being radicalized, a lot, even just like your YouTube videos and stuff, it doesn't have to be directly QAnon. There's so much radicalization we're just kind of constantly exposed to.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really good point to make. Continuing on to discussing anti-Semitism within our government and current politics. I'm okay. I'm just, wording with issues. Okay. So moving on, there's been a few instances of people in our government making openly anti-Semitic comments, and it's not always intentional, fortunately, but it has happened. So in one instance, according to an article from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency written by Marcy Oster, a city council president in New Jersey named Kathy McBride used the phrase "Jew her down" in a public discussion in September of 2019 and promptly received backlash. But so that phrase means to cheat or to haggle, one that is based on the idea that Jewish people are greedy and as a result can do with their money. And though she apologized after being called out on it, it wasn't before two other council members defended her, with one saying it was a verb and the other saying that it wasn't a vicious statement and that it has been said many times before. And though they all eventually apologized, there's multiple issues here. One, the fact that this anti-Semitic phrase here was so common and normalized that a bunch of people weren't able to recognize it as anti-Semitic. One that is harmful, one that Jewish people have to suffer the consequences of. And second, the fact that people tried to brush it off and delegitimize the issue of that phrase because it had been normalized. If someone in the government gets called out for doing or saying something anti-Semitic, there is a chance that they simply might not be educated. However, when a member of government is educated on the issue and about how anti-Semitic terminology can harm Jewish people, yet continue to use or spread them or try to delegitimize these issues, just be wary and take note.
Yeah. Also, just to add a little bit on, you shouldn't be in government if you don't understand, basic fascism, basic, dog whistles, basic anti-Semitic, basic racist, basically minority attacking microaggressions. Yeah, you should be smart enough to and aware enough so that you don't have situations like that. Another example is Senator Marjorie Greene. She claimed that the California wildfires were Jewish space lasers. So far, she hasn't apologized, but that's not surprising, given her other beliefs, such as the Sandy Hook and Parkland shootings were staged, Muslims don't belong in government, leading Democratic officials should be executed, and that 9/11 was an inside job. What a lovely woman. Before we move on, I want to point out that a lot of anti-Semitism does come from the right in our politics. However, that isn't to say that anti-Semitism can't exist on the left side of politics either. We must be aware of anti-Semitism on both sides of the government and do our best as citizens to make sure our officials get held accountable for anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination.
With that said, It's important to be able to recognize anti-Semitism in our daily lives, our government, and in our societies in order to better fight against harmful ideology and, most importantly, to better protect and support Jewish people.
Yes, we should. We hope that this episode helps our listeners to better understand the history of anti-Semitism and how it both remains and surfaces as an issue today. Speaking on this topic is the first step in being able to address and discern anti-Semitism. By doing this, we can do a better job of protecting as well as uplifting Jewish people, and in a larger sense, help fight against all forms of discrimination. And thank you for tuning in. It means a lot to us all here. If you need somebody to talk to, look up the Trevor Project or Muncie Outreach. And the suicide hotline is 800-273-8255. We all here care about you, so please take care of yourself, and we'll see you all in the next episode.